What's up guys, welcome to another range day. Today we're going to be shooting a real-life unicorn, the B&T GHM9-SD. Guys, if you enjoy the content that I'm making, then please make sure to like and subscribe and leave me a message down in the comments section. I hate asking, but it really does help the algorithm a lot, so I'd really appreciate it. And if you ring the bell icon, you should get notifications when new videos are released as well. Additionally, if you want more Chester's Hobbies content, you can follow me on Instagram where you can see what I'm working on and get previews of upcoming videos. And I'm also pretty active on Reddit if you'd like to follow along with the conversations there. Alright, well that's enough of that, so back to the gun of the day, my GHM9-SD. So guys, this gun in this configuration is a unicorn for a few reasons. The biggest reason is that from my understanding, there have actually been less than 100 of these SD conversion kits made and sold in the US since they were announced in 2020. They're extremely rare and very, very cool. Now, as a result of that rarity, this is officially the gun that I've had to wait the longest to complete out of my entire collection. So I decided that I wanted this gun in this configuration all the way back in May of 2020. So I jumped on a waiting list and it took my dealer about 14 months to get one for me, at which point I then waited another 13 months for the tax stamp to get approved. So when you get the SD conversion kit, it comes with three key components. It comes with a GHM9-SD suppressor, a 4.3-inch ported barrel, and a larger M-LOK handguard that allows the suppressor to be tucked underneath when installed. Now, if you're familiar with an MP5-SD, this GHM9-SD kit accomplishes the same thing. So essentially what happens is the barrel is ported right next to the chamber with several small holes. These holes vent out gas and pressure when the round is fired that reduces the velocity of the bullet, effectively taking supersonic ammunition and making it subsonic. To capture those gases, the suppressor actually threads in at the base of the barrel by the chamber, covering those barrel ports as opposed to a traditional suppressor that would thread onto the muzzle of the barrel. So in simple terms, an SD kit like this allows you to shoot supersonic 115 grain or 124 grain ammunition while effectively making it subsonic and suppressing it, making it much quieter than shooting supersonic ammunition out of a traditional suppressor, which would still have a loud supersonic crack downrange. It also means that you can shoot quiet subsonic 9mm with cheap supersonic range ammunition instead of expensive subsonic ammunition. The MP5-SD was originally made for special forces units that needed to be very quiet, and the technology behind them is really cool. These B&T SD kits operate nearly identically, and B&T actually makes suppressors for HK2, which is very cool as well. So this setup should actually be very legit. I'm really excited about it. Now, as for the gun itself, this is pretty interesting as well. I waited about 6 months for GHM9s to come back in stock after an inventory drought in 2020, and when they finally came in stock, my dealer only had the Glock lower models, but I wanted to use the B&T magazines because I already had an APC9 and TP9 and a bunch of magazines for those. My dealer happened to have some of the APC9 Pro B&T magazine lowers available, so we just swapped out the Glock lower for an APC9 Pro lower, which makes this a relatively unusual assembly because the lower says APC and includes the Pro upgrades like a swappable pistol grip and enhanced bolt controls as opposed to the standard GHM9 that has the older style lower. This is a Gen 2 GHM9 model that originally came with a 6.9-inch barrel. I really enjoyed it in its original pistol configuration. I rolled in a little footage of what that looked like, but the plan was always to upgrade it with the SD kit once it became available. I originally went with the telescoping tailhook brace setup and the B&T angled foregrip, which is honestly an excellent configuration. But hey, you know me, I love SBRs, so I filled out a Form 1 to convert this GHM9 to an SBR, and once it was approved, I converted the telescoping brace to a telescoping stock and added a B&T vertical foregrip. The stock has a little bit of a longer length of pull than the brace setup did, which is nice, and I love the extra leverage that a vertical grip provides when it comes to recoil control. Other than that, I added the B&T jet funnel magwell to make reload smoother, and then I have a Trijicon RMR with a 3.25 MOA red dot on a basic UTG Absolute Coat witness riser to keep the gun light, compact, and handy. I'm still using the B&T flip-up backup iron sights that came with it, and they co-witness nicely with the RMR. I also installed the HB Industries safety lever spring kit to make the safety a lot easier to actuate. It's fantastic now. I really wish that it was like that from the factory, honestly, but either way, it's an easy and inexpensive upgrade. Now, aside from installing the SD kit, the most recent upgrade that I made was swapping out the stock trigger for an Eltman Pro trigger that I've been seeing a lot of folks recommending. Supposedly, it's supposed to allow the safety to still actuate while the hammer was forward like the stock trigger does, but that actually didn't work for me. It's not the end of the world, just something worth noting. Anyway, this trigger is adjustable and it's a very light and crisp single-stage trigger with barely any travel for the break or reset. I've only had a little bit of time behind it so far, but it seems like an excellent trigger. When I first got it, I did have a couple of issues with the trigger not resetting, but I think I might have adjusted the trigger pull weight to be a little bit too light, so hopefully that's fixed now. So this is going to be my first time really testing this gun at length in this configuration today, guys. I'm really excited for this. I'm going to be testing with a few different types of ammunition, some 115 grain and 124 grain supersonic, and then some subsonic 150 grain just to see what happens and see how it handles at different loads. I've also brought my APC9 Pro to the range today with my dead air Wolfman, so we're going to use that to see how the GHM9-SD sounds compared to a similar firearm with subsonic ammunition and a good suppressor. And while we're doing that, I'll also shoot some supersonic ammunition to the APC9 and Wolfman so that you can get a better idea of what the GHM9 is actually doing under the hood. Alright guys, well it should be a pretty quiet session and a ton of fun, so let's get out to range and see what we think of the GHM9-SD. Alright guys, so I want to do a little bit of an ammunition test here with the GHM9-SD, and in doing so I want to essentially kill 4 birds with 1 stone. So we're going to test 5 shots of 115 grain supersonic ammunition, 5 shots of 124 grain supersonic ammunition, and then 5 shots of 150 grain subsonic ammunition. Now the 4 things that I want to test here are, for 1, I want to hear the difference in sound between the 3 different loads. 2, I want to see how the ported barrel affects the cycling of them. For instance, I'm not sure that the 150 grain subsonic load will actually be able to cycle in this setup. And the 3rd thing is that I've actually got my competition electronics chronograph setup as well, so we're going to be testing these loads to see what we get for velocities in these rounds and compare that to the factory advertised velocities to get a better idea of what the SD kit is accomplishing for us. Then lastly, after that, I'm going to shoot the same 3 loads through my APC9 Pro with the dead air Wolfman attached so that we can hear how they compare in terms of the sound difference and see the velocity difference there as well. Alright, so let's start out here with the 115 grain supersonic ammunition in the GHM9-SD. Alright, now we'll do 124 grain. And then we'll try 150 grain subsonic. Alright, now we'll try the APC9 Pro with the dead air Wolfman, starting with 115 grain supersonic. Okay, now 124 grain supersonic through the APC9 Pro and the Wolfman. .150 grain subsonic and the APC9 Pro with the Wolfman. So guys, I'm doing a little bit of testing with the new APC9 magazines from KCI-USA. I've got a B&T OEM mag here in my right hand and the new KCI magazine here in my left hand. The finish is a little bit smoother than the B&T, but overall the design is nearly identical. So much so that the KCI magazines actually accept the B&T base pads, which is really cool. But other than that, there's a couple of neat improvements on these. The base plate on these seems a little bit more robust to me. And the big improvement is that the KCI magazine features steel reinforced feed lips, which is definitely a welcome upgrade. Otherwise, you can see it's a slightly darker color, a little bit more of a translucent black on the KCI magazine. And I noticed there's slightly less spring tension, which makes them a little bit easier to load. And I know a pretty common complaint with the OEM B&T magazines is that these edges on the feed lips are really sharp, so if you're loading by hand with your thumb and you're not wearing gloves, you're going to get stabbed a little bit. Now on the KCI magazines, these edges are a little bit rounded, which makes them much less uncomfortable when loading. Now as a full disclosure, KCI-USA did send me these two magazines for testing and evaluation. No money was exchanged, they just sent me these two magazines and asked me for my feedback. Obviously I'll be completely honest with you guys as I'm testing these and giving you my feedback. So far I've got to say they've been running great for me, and if they continue to run well, I think they're a really great option for B&T owners, as they're about 20 to 25% less than the OEM magazines, and they got a couple of nice upgrades. Alright guys, this gun is just so cool. I absolutely love it. It's really impressive how quiet this GHM9-SD can make supersonic ammunition. And it's really soft shooting as well. If you're familiar with competition shooting at all and the concept of power factor, what's really interesting about an SD gun like this is since it's lowering the velocity of the ammunition, it's actually lowering the power factor and therefore lowering the felt recoil of the round, which is really cool. I absolutely love these B&T collapsible stocks. They're really comfortable on the shoulder, and even though the cheek weld honestly isn't that great, it really doesn't bother me at all because the gun is so soft shooting as it is. I really like the M-LOK handguard that comes with the SD kit. It's a lot more narrow than the APC9 handguard, and it makes it really easy to get a nice strong thumb over bore grip. And personally, I just love the look of suppressors tucked under handguards, especially when they're this tight. It's just a really clean look aesthetically, in my opinion. As for my thoughts on the individual elements of this gun, the B&T jet funnel makes inserting magazines extremely easy, so I'm a big fan of that, and I've got it on both my APC and my GHM. The ambidextrous safety is perfect after installing those HB Industries springs, so I love that. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with this Elfman trigger. When it's working, it's honestly spectacular. It's very similar to the Timney trigger in my SIG MPX. It's a really short, crisp, and clean single-stage break with a nice fast and positive reset. The problem is, because it's adjustable, it is prone to having issues, so I did have 1 or 2 times that the trigger didn't reset on me, and I just had to tighten up the set screw a little bit. It's not a huge deal if you're just using it for the range, but I don't know if I would necessarily recommend it for serious use because the adjustability adds in a potential failure point. For competition use, it could be amazing, but if it fails on you in the middle of a stage, it'd be pretty annoying. Now, I did put Loctite on it, so it wouldn't back out on me, but maybe I need to put a little bit more on there. Otherwise, honestly, I did shoot over 260 rounds today in total, and I think it only happened to me twice, so it's not a huge problem, but definitely something worth noting. I think the Trijicon RMR works great on this gun. It's nice and light and handy, and since I have an astigmatism, I do tend to like the larger dots because they're less likely to starburst on me. It doesn't have a huge viewing window, and it's not very forgiving in that regard, but I really didn't run into any issues today with it. One of the things that I love about these B&T collapsible stocks is they can be deployed just by grabbing them and ripping them open. They can actually be collapsed by depressing the button and letting gravity take over. In my opinion, it's a really cool feature, and it's definitely a very premium feeling stock. I really like the grips on the APC Pro lowers. You can technically swap them out with just about any AR-15 grip, but I like having something a little bit different on these guns. The B&T vertical grip is very comfortable, works great for me, and gives me a ton of leverage when I'm shooting. I always love having a vertical grip on my guns, so that's no surprise. And then, of course, there's just a general factor of the quality Swiss manufacturing. Before I actually got any B&Ts, I heard people fawning over the fit and finish, and I wasn't sure if maybe it was just something they were saying because they spent a lot of money on them. But in all honesty, the fit and finish of these Swiss guns is really just second to none. The ambidextrous magazine release buttons work great, but I did find that my B&T mags weren't dropping free today. It's not a huge deal, they just need a little bit of motivation to be extracted. I love the ambidextrous bolt release on my APC9, but the one on my GHM has been a little bit finicky. I found with my APC that if I lubricated it a little bit, it worked great for me, but for one reason or another, sometimes it takes a little bit of extra force with the GHM. Specifically on the right side, that is. On the left side, it seems to work fine. It's not a huge deal, it's nice that it's ambidextrous, so you have the option of using either side, but I do wish that it was a little bit smoother for me on the right. I'm also happy to say that I didn't really have any issues with the SD suppressor threading off on me. Every 20 rounds or so, I would give it a nice twist to try and tighten it just in case, but it never really moved much on me. I really wish that B&T would include QD sling points on their guns. This paracord loop works fine with my Savvy Sniper sling and these HK style hooks, but I still prefer QD whenever I can. Preston Precision used to make a QD sling point that worked with the APC9 telescoping stock, and I've got that on mine, but they stopped making it. I don't think they ever made one for the GHM, unfortunately. Maybe it's something they'll make again in the future. I'd be really happy about that. Now, as for the GHM9 versus the APC9, I will say that honestly, the fit and finish between the GHM and the APC9 is nearly identical. In stock configuration, the APC9 has a slightly softer recoil impulse because of the improved hydraulic buffer, but in the SD configuration, I think the GHM9 is actually a little bit softer shooting than the APC. I also like that, at least how I have them configured, my GHM9 has a slightly longer length of pull, and it's got a longer handguard so I can mount the vertical foregrip further out on the gun and have more leverage for controlling recoil. Now, sound quality wise, the Dead Air Wolfman with 150 grain subsonic ammunition is the quietest I've ever heard a 9mm firearm get, but I'm actually really excited to say that the GHM9-SD with 115 grain or 124 grain supersonic ammunition sounds extremely similar. I would say that the Wolfman has a slightly deeper tone overall, but in terms of actual perceived volume at the ear of the shooter, it's really close and very hard to tell the difference, honestly. Now, this is the original GHM9-SD kit, so it's not the recently announced reduced back pressure suppressor, but honestly, I had no issues whatsoever with back pressure or blowback. It was really pleasant to shoot. And again, that's with supersonic 115 grain and 124 grain ammunition. It's just so cool that it can do this. Technology behind it is just really interesting and a ton of fun to use. I was also really excited to see that the 150 grain subsonic ammunition actually cycled just fine the GHM9-SD. It was only ejecting like 2 or 3 feet away, so it was definitely on the edge, but it ran fine, and it sounded fantastic. But to me, the entire reason to use a gun like this is to get that subsonic sound with less expensive supersonic ammunition, so I don't plan on using the more expensive 150 grain subsonic ammunition too much. So yeah, guys, there it is, a real-life Swiss unicorn. I had a total blast with this thing today. I really can't wait to shoot it again soon. It's just an extremely fun and pleasant shooter, and no accuracy issues at all with the direct thread suppressor, which is great. So after waiting a total of 27 months for this gun, what are my final thoughts on it? Was it worth the wait? I would say yeah, honestly. It's a ton of fun. It's a completely unique element of my collection. It does something that none of my other guns can do, and that's really cool. And the long-term pedigree that B&T has with making suppressors for HK and then also making their own suppressors and their own firearms, and of course having the APC9K recently selected for the US Army subcompact weapons contract, it all adds up to this being just a really unique and awesome piece for my collection. It also has a really interesting look and feel and a very unique silhouette that makes it stand out in a crowd of very similar looking firearms. So that's gonna be all for today, guys. We got a lot more videos coming out soon, including more PCCs, ARs, AKs, handguns, and shotguns. So remember to like and subscribe, ring the bell, stay tuned, and thanks for stopping by.